That's one tax. Corporation tax is another one. Your personal affairs are different. So where HMRC decides to look is also, it's not uniform.
When does a business actually need you?
What I do is in a nutshell, get people out of trouble with HMRC. So if someone's not paid their taxes or are suspected of not paying their taxes, then I sort of come in with my specialism. The fraud happens usually at the smaller level. And the way you find them is...
Do you remember your first client?
They estimated a 2 million plus bill. It was in total close to 3 million with penalties and interest. But we settled for £464,000. And that meant he was able to finance it. He was able to pay it.
That person who doesn't show any income but drives a Range Rover, HMRC would be like, okay, let's look on him and see what he does.
Not to get too controversial, do they always find those people? I would say no.
Why?
Now we're getting political, I think. Getting away with it completely is no longer really possible. It's a case of when rather than if they're going to find out.
Welcome to another episode of the Muslim Pound podcast. Today we have every single person's hero, the man who fights HMRC, Salman. Welcome to the podcast.
Assalamu alaikum, Zain. Thank you for having me.
Okay, you fight HMRC for a living.
Yeah.
So just introduce yourself, tell the viewers why they need you.
That's a good one. Well, I hope they never need me. That's the first thing. Generally, I'm one of the few people probably who's, in my profession at least, I always start by saying, I hope you never need me. But if you do, what I do is in a nutshell, get people out of trouble with HMRC. So if someone's not paid their taxes or are suspected of not paying their taxes, then I sort of come in with my specialism. So in a nutshell, that's me.
But you have a bit of inside knowledge, right? Because you used to work at HMRC.
Yeah, so I'm an ex-HMRC tax inspector. I worked in HMRC for about 5 years. Started as a graduate, then eventually ended up working in the large business service and then the fraud investigation service, no less, and then decided to just leave.
So you must have an accounting degree?
No, I am not an accountant. My qualification is having worked at HMRC and having done their training. Beyond that, I don't have anything else. I suppose you could say I'm qualified by experience. Alhamdulillah.
So how does someone who doesn't have an accounting degree, in fact you have a degree in medical science, have expertise in tax the way you do?
It's by experience, it's by training. So been blessed to have worked with some really great people over the years, starting with HMRC. Everyone likes to give them a kicking, but credit where it's due. I got really good, solid grounding. And a lot of it was not necessarily, it might sound odd from a tax advisor. It wasn't in tax, it was in more kind of investigation and stuff like that. So, I've been blessed to work in really good teams, starting with HMRC, doing the graduate scheme, which was really good to teach you the basics that you need to know across, from bookkeeping to basic accounting to more advanced accounting to the tax side of things. So alhamdulillah, that stood me in good stead, I would say.
So you were an inspector, right? At HMRC. So what does an inspector's role entail?
Well, first thing first is I use the word inspector, but HMRC doesn't use that anymore. For whatever reason.
Investigator.
Officer. Okay. Like, you're either a caseworker or officer. I get all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff on HMRC letters these days. But I use tax inspector because old money, that's what makes sense to people. Like that kind of resonates or kind of they understand. But an officer in HMRC, depending on where you're based and what role you're actually in, you could be doing various different things. My type of role was, whether it was in the large business service or the fraud investigation service, it was about making sure that the taxpayer population that we were responsible for was compliant. So for in large business, that was the biggest companies in this country you can think of, usually 200 million turnover and more, billion.
Tesco's, the Amazons.
That level. Yeah. Can't confirm or deny who I've looked at when I was in HMRC. But that level, you're talking household names. And it was about making sure they are compliant. There's a separate way HMRC looks after them. Rightly so, in my opinion. Than it does pretty much every other part of the population. But every department in HMRC has its sort of remit and stuff like that. And then in the fraud investigation service, for me, my job was to effectively find the fraudsters, people who intentionally haven't paid their taxes.
So from an inspector point of view, how do you find them kind of people? So like, just say you've got this business, 500 million turnover, you suspect them of some fraud. What's that process?
I mean, from my experience, we never really, those level of businesses don't tend to commit fraud as such, although it's debatable, but most of them will get things wrong, or either get it wrong technically or take liberties with the technical position. The fraud happens usually, I'm generalizing a little bit, at the smaller level. And the way you find them is, I suppose these days, social media, what's going on in the banking system, reports from the banks, reports from other advisors. So your viewers might or might not be aware that when you go into a bank and you deposit a lot of money, the bank is probably making a suspicious activity report. If you go and talk to your accountant and say something that's suspicious, then he or she is supposed to make a suspicious activity report. That all goes to the National Crime Agency, eventually gets to HMRC if it has a tax angle. So basically, HMRC gets a wealth of information, like crazy amount. With every person, you're talking hundreds of data points. Your mobile contract, houses you've sold, bought, you name it, they have access to that. So they can build a picture on people pretty quickly these days. And they're getting really good at that. That's how you find people.
So basically, is it true that that person who doesn't show any income but drives a Range Rover, HMRC will be like, okay, let's look on him and see what he does?
Yeah, eventually. That's kind of you'd say that's the ideal scenario from HMRC's perspective, that they'll find those people. Not to get too controversial, do they always find those people? I would say no.
Why?
Now we're getting political, I think. No, we will get political with the answer. Let's correct that. The reason you won't is, or the reason they don't is, HMRC is stretched massively. I see all sorts from HMRC, but I cut my teeth in HMRC, so I have a lot of time for HMRC and the people who work there. And generally speaking, they're having to do a lot with very little, because successive governments have, I wouldn't be exaggerating if I said, decimated the workforce. The manpower isn't quite there. So the lack of resource, the lack of investigative experience now, because the lack of resources meant people have gone out of HMRC who had 30, 40, 50 years of experience. And the people that are coming in don't have that. And there's nobody around, or not as many people around to teach them. So what you get is a department that's not very well resourced. Although in recent years, there's been a bit more investment. People in my work always look at that cynically. Where are those people? When you hear, they're going to recruit 5,000 people, that's not easy. Yes. How are you going to recruit and train? Usually there's a movement on some people from here to there. What does that mean? What does that look like? But the long story short is they are getting more investment. The government or successive governments now have started to see the value of that. So we're seeing more of it, but the reason they don't catch everyone is because they just can't. They don't have the resource.
Okay, so I have a small business, an estate agency, High Castle Estates. So what would I be doing that could trigger an inspection? Even if I'm doing it right, but what would I be doing that could trigger an inspection?
I mean, some investigations, inquiries, whatever you want to call it, happen because randomly HMRC has to pick a certain proportion of the population and look into their affairs to learn what's going on. That's just regular. So you might get an inquiry for no reason other than you were randomly selected.
Is it like airport randomly selected?
There's an element of that, absolutely. I've had a lot of that in the airports, as you can imagine. But in terms of going out and selecting businesses, then look, there's a lot of there is bias. It's human nature. Is it more than bias? I don't know. I couldn't say. But in terms of like how HMRC goes about selecting people, it'll be things like what's in your returns. For example, if in a certain year you're I don't know, let's pick something, your R&D credits, or probably you don't have any R&D, that's a bad example, but things like, I don't know, you have staff expenses, for example, and that just rockets up, or mashallah, we're sitting in a new studio, right? You're going to have a lot more expenditure for this. If you are dealing this through High Castle, and I don't get into too much of that, but for example, if you had something like that opt a particular figure on your return, that could get flagged as part of the risk assessment process.
VAT return.
VAT return, absolutely. So if you claim, people, like if they have a lot of expenditure, especially of a capital nature, where they may be able to claim some of that VAT back. And I'm not a VAT expert, so people might shoot me if I say something wrong here. But yeah, if that spikes up, you can get a VAT inspection. And that's actually a good point, because VAT's one tax, corporation tax is another one. Your personal affairs are different. So where HMRC decides to look is also, it's not uniform. They all have their own ways.
So just say now, HMRC just looked at the VAT return and then they send a letter for inquiry. That's when people panic, right? Because no one wants a brown envelope from HMRC.
Yeah.
So is that where you step in?
Not necessarily. So I tend to come in where I can add value, really, because I'm a specialist advisor. Generally speaking, and not to get not to sound like a mercenary about it, but my services cost more than your regular advisors or your accountants. So where I come in is where people are either worried where HMRC is going to go with certain things. They know something's already wrong and they're worried about HMRC finding out, or that inquiry's been rumbling on for a long time and they've not managed to get on top of it and control it and get HMRC to go away, because that will cost them not just time but money. So I come in where there's a degree of complexity, there's a degree of value add from my perspective that either the taxpayer or client, more appropriately, or their accountant sees, okay, this is getting beyond me. I can't deal with this. We need to bring in someone like Salman. So I tend to come in then. Generally speaking, I don't deal with the regular stuff because I wouldn't add value. And HMRC is entitled to look at your books and records. So, there's no point being obtrusive for the sake of it. It's not going to serve any purpose.
Okay, so what kind of information do HMRC ask for? Because sometimes they just ask for a list of 20 things. I think that's to throw people off and make people panic. But what kind of information do they generally ask for?
So people might have, the viewers may have experienced this, that HMRC tends to take the approach of, if you don't ask, you don't get. Unfortunately, if you've seen the 20 requests or the 30 requests or even more, sometimes that's the reason. Like HMRC will ask for everything it thinks it needs to ask for. And it's the job of the advisor, the accountant, or if I'm coming in, my job to make sure what's being asked for is reasonably required for the purposes of checking the tax position. Now, if it's a VAT inspection, it should be pertinent to the VAT position. If it's a corporation tax investigation inquiry, it should be reasonably required for checking that, so on and so forth. But sometimes you'll see it off the bat. Can we have the bank statements of the directors? Why? This is a company inquiry. That's not a justification. So, yeah.
Okay, so if they ask for a personal bank statement, do we have to give it? You've written an article about this as well.
Yeah, it's one of my most read ones, I think. I still get a lot of work on the back of it. As with anything in tax, the answer to it is that it depends. Generally speaking, is an overextension and an invasion of privacy, or an overextension of HMRC's power, and it could and should be classed as that. Now, the problem is a lot of times people, business owners, they don't think about how they're going to manage HMRC when they're doing their business deals or their day-to-day running. They're there to run a business and make money. And it's up to the advisors, the accountants, to educate this. And what happens is people will use their personal accounts, for example, and there'll be a muddying of the waters, let's just say, between business and personal. It happens more when people are sole traders and trading in their own name rather than through a company or a corporate, but it can still happen. So it's about, to try and prevent it from happening, there should be a separation of the two. And if there is a clear separation and there's not this muddying of the waters, then the answer to that should be, it's a higher bar for HMRC to get those bank statements, because they need to justify why are they going and invading the director's privacy if it's not linked to the company. If they want to know what dividend he or she has got, they can check the company account, so they can get dividend vouchers or the meeting notes from the company. So my answer to that is that it should be a very high bar to allow HMRC to get those bank statements. But like I said, it depends on the situation.
Okay, so what's the reason you actually left HMRC?
So having worked there for, I think it was 5 years at the time, and having done the graduate scheme, I didn't see scope for progression. I didn't see that I was going to get to where I wanted to get to quickly enough. So rightly, for my own benefit or my own detriment, I'm very driven. I'm very ambitious. I'm always looking to improve and do something more. So the moment I finished the graduate scheme, I was in my manager's ear going, when I can jump onto the next program to equip myself to make that next jump in 2 or 3 years' time. Unfortunately, what answers I got was, you're talented and you're good enough, but you're going to have to do your time. That's the civil service way. You have to do your time, you have to take your time, and you have to jump through hoops. And it could have taken me probably 4, 5, 6 years. That would have been quick to get the next promotion. And I just couldn't hang about for that. There was also, at the time, we're talking 2017, 2018, we were still very much at the, not necessarily the back end, we were probably pretty much still in the middle of the austerity
Okay.
sort of thing, whatever it was. But
Still are, but the word is changing.
I mean, they've sort of loosened the purse strings a little bit, and people have had a bit more pay. At the time, the pay rises were like 0 point something percent. You wouldn't see it. Like the tax would just eat it away. They literally weren't seeing any increases year on year. The only increases I saw were because I was progressing through the graduate scheme. But once I'd done that, I wasn't going to see anything. So for me, it was, and at the end of the day, I have a young family, and I'm trying to do the best by them. So when I looked at it, I just felt like I couldn't stick around in that system long enough, and I didn't have the patience.
And then from there, you went to Mazars.
Yeah, so from there I left and joined the tax investigations team at Mazars, which is a top 8 accountancy firm in this country. I think they're now called Forvis Mazars, so they had a bit of a merger. And I joined an amazing team again there, really great senior people who I learned a lot from.
And then you went to BDO and you spent a few years there. And then you were a director, correct?
Yeah, so alhamdulillah, I managed to progress pretty well at Mazars to start with. Within a year, I was promoted. Again, I left and not necessarily got promotion, but definitely kind of, got paid better. And then within a year, I'd got the promotion that was going to take me 5 years to get to the next level. So I became a senior manager. I was at Mazars till the end of, literally till the end of 2021. I then joined BDO at the start of 2022. I joined them as an associate director, and alhamdulillah, worked there until March last year, 2024. And yeah, I mean, I've been blessed again to work with some great people in these places, and then eventually decided employment wasn't for me either. Again, like someone was looking for the next thing, and then that's where my current venture, ADL Tax or ADL Tax, depending on what's easier for you to say, started.
So why did you decide to make the jump, and why did you make the jump then? Because I think when we first met, you were still working at BDO.
Yeah.
And you were thinking about it. So what was your whole thought process?
I think it's been a long-ish journey to get to that decision. And it's certainly not something I would say that's happened overnight. It's been a sort of a process, but in the back of my mind, I always knew that I left uni and I had my own business, a completely different one, but I went into business. I don't really come from an entrepreneurial family, at least on my dad's side. My mum's side's a bit more, but I always seemed to be attracted to that. So I think it was in the back of my mind. But what happened after I joined BDO? I joined in January 2022. In September 2022, my mum got ill, and she got quite seriously ill. She was diagnosed with quite a serious sort of condition that affected the blood flow to her brain. It's a very rare condition. It's called moya moya. But effectively, what that meant was at 64 years old, my mum just pretty much had to stop Like, no more work, no more this, no more that, no more driving, nothing. And that really put things into perspective for me. And that started the kind of the mental process for me to start thinking about life, future. Don't get me wrong, I worked for both the firms I worked for, and HMRC were amazing, flexible, allowed me the space. Even when my mum got ill, BDO were very supportive. I got whatever time I needed to go take mum to hospitals. I remember when I got the phone call, my mum was ill. I was actually heading to a client meeting with my boss, the partner, and my dad phoned me and he said, yeah, I think mum's had a stroke. You need to get, yeah, I'd phoned my boss. I was literally in pieces, and she was like, don't worry about it. You go do what you have to do. Take care of mum. You know, I literally got off the train, jumped in the taxi and drove straight to the hospital, and that was it. There was no questions asked. So alhamdulillah, always had that kind of support. But it started a process in my mind of whether employment and being stuck in the 9 to 5, it was actually longer than that for me. I used to do funky hours, but whether that was right or not, it went from, the initial stage was to ask for alternative working. So I went from 9 to 5, 5 days a week. I said, I don't want to work Fridays. Can we try and work something out? So I reduced my hours a little bit, packed them all up into Monday to Thursday. Did that quite early on. Again, they were very supportive, but it just started this domino effect of putting life into perspective, and it just comes down to that, really. I just didn't have, I just didn't want to be in employment anymore.
Is it as simple as having the flexibility of working your own hours?
That's a huge part of it. But I think for me, there's always the ambitious side of things. I wanted to create something that was mine and my own. I didn't create Adil to have a lifestyle business where I'm working 9 to 5 in my own business for the days I want to and get paid for it. It is a firm. I still call it a firm, even though I've got consultants, I've got no employees, but I still call it a firm and I call it a business, and I call it that because that's my mindset, because that's where I want to get to. So it was an element of creating financial freedom, creating time freedom, and creating something of value that I felt like would give me a better return on my time, abilities, and talents. Alhamdulillah, that Allah has blessed me with, to go and reap the rewards from that directly. So there was all sorts of, there's a big mesh of reasons for it, really.
So you're now nearly 2 years in. How has being in business helped your flexibility?
So 1 year
How's
in.
your mum as well?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Mom's really well. Jazakallah khair. I know we talked about it earlier as
Sorry,
well.
1 year in.
1 year in. Not yet 1 year, actually. It feels like 2 years. It feels like a lot longer. But yeah, mom's good, alhamdulillah. She's, du'as are requested. But in terms of business, you just said 2 years. I sometimes make that mistake of saying to people like, oh, I'm 12 months in or 11 months. Then I have to, like I was saying, I was 10 months in from about October, November. And if you think about, I started in April. Being a tax advisor, I should know that's only, that doesn't add up. But that's what it feels like sometimes when you're running your own business. And I mean that in a positive way. It feels like I've got so much done that it feels like a lot more time should have passed by now. And I'm alhamdulillah, again, I'm, all from the blessings of Allah and the barakah that, managed to progress the business to such a point that I am, my year ends in end of March. I'm so in month 11 right now, and I'm alhamdulillah way ahead of where I thought I would be. So, it's been an amazing journey already, and I'm just getting started with it, really.
Are you fed up with bad tenants? Are you struggling to sell or buy a property? At High Castle Estates, we know property isn't always easy, but that's why we're here. We help landlords secure reliable tenants fast. We help sellers sell with confidence and achieve the best price. We help buyers find the right home without the hassle. Property is stressful, but with the right team, it doesn't have to be. So, if you're looking to sell, rent, or buy a home, get in touch today at High Castle Estates in East London. You can find the details in the description below. So, why the name ADL Tax? Do you mean as in fair? Oh, just.
Yeah. So that's I think that's very that's literally what it means. Adl, as in justice in Arabic, and there's a good story behind that. It's I didn't start with that name. I had Accurate Tax all signed up. I had the domain that was set. I had some logos, and then no, I didn't have the domain. I went to get the domain. I think a month before I was gonna start, so I was in my notice period. I was trying to be careful of what I did when I did it. So as I got closer, I was like, okay, let me set up the domain now and let's just do it. Register the company, and between registering the company and the domain, I started to hit hiccups. Like the right version wasn't available, or somebody else was too close, and I felt like I'm building a brand for the future here. I didn't want any overlaps. I didn't want to take any risks. So it felt like, okay, let's just think again. And I remember, I think it was either just start of or just before Ramadan, I was kind of really brainstorming. I was like, okay, this isn't going to work. Let me sit down. And then I just kind of just sat down one night and just started going through stuff, and I started Googling different terms. What does tax mean in different languages? And it was just tax means tax. You write it in Urdu, it comes out as tax. You write it in Arabic, it comes out as tax. And literally they use their own letters, but they call it tax. So I was just like, okay, then started thinking sideways, and I literally just landed on Adl. And I'd done my istikhara beforehand, so it just felt like it was meant to be. And the moment I landed on Adl and I wrote it as Ain Dal Lam, which is ADL, I was like, okay, it works both ways. So subhanAllah, like it's Adl and it's ADL and it's tax, and like it's just literally it, and that was it. It's just decided, and it really fit with what I do, because I'm trying to over egg it in any way, like with what I do, or trying to think I'm more important than I am, but I try and get my clients justice in a lot of situations. Don't get me wrong, some of my clients have done some really bad stuff in terms of their tax affairs, and I need to get them on the straight and narrow, but I try and get them on the straight and narrow in the just way. So whichever way you look at it, what I do is to do with justice and tax, right? Getting people in the right. Where if they're being hounded by HMRC, getting them off their back. If they've got things wrong, getting them on the straight and narrow, so the rest of society is better off and they're better off. So it just fit with justice and tax and doing what I do. So I just kind of ran with it from that point on, really.
Okay. Do you remember your first client?
It's a bit of a haze, to be honest with you. I think it's a difficult one, because alhamdulillah, work started to flood in the moment I started. So who's my first one technically would be a difficult one. But I know some of them are very, very memorable in terms of who I've helped, but I couldn't tell you exactly who my first client was.
Okay. I think you wrote about it on LinkedIn. Not your first one, but one of your first clients.
Yeah.
They had a 2 million tax bill.
So they weren't actually my first personal one. So I think this is the example you're talking about is from possibly when I was at one of the firms. So I've had a few clients like that where they've had multi-million pound sort of potential disputes with HMRC. And, I've gone in there, whether I was at the firm and with the teams or since, to go in there and kind of, using a bit of nous, a bit of know-how, try and negotiate and put together models which show HMRC that it's not X, it's Y. So one particular one was the guy had, I think it was close to 40 properties and didn't pay any tax on it. And
Wait, why didn't he pay any tax on it?
just never got around to it. if you can, yeah. I mean, I've met a few people like that who give you that explanation, and after a bit of digging, you think, yeah, actually, he's telling the truth. That it just, because you got to remember that, and I'm not justifying the behavior in any way, but when you're out there, you're trying to make your way. You do one thing and it works, and you do another and the other. Before you know it, you don't really think about too much. You just kind of get head down, head in the sand, and you just motor on. That kind of happened to him, and he got so far into it, then he started to just put his head in the sand literally and go, I don't want to deal with this because this looks too scary. And then another 10, 15 years had passed, and we're 20 years down the line from when he started, and he's never submitted a tax return. And then at one point, HMRC said, based on the amount of properties and what he's sold, what he's then bought, where they are, what he does with them, they estimated a 2 million plus bill. It was in total close to 3 million with penalties and interest. We then got set to working on some economic models on which property was rented when, what were the market rents, what was the Bank of England interest rates. We
Sorry,
built
how many years was it?
20 years.
Okay.
He'd actually been in the business for more than 20 years, but HMRC could only assess 20. So what we did was we built up an economic model which showed his profits were X amount and all of that. In the end, I still remember the figure, we settled for £464,000, which, a property portfolio by that time, which was worth about 3 million, wasn't a bad marginal rate
Not bad.
for him. And that meant he was able to finance it. He was able to pay it. But alhamdulillah, Allah's blessed me to be able to get those kind of results for a lot of clients. I've recently settled a case for a smaller property investor, about 5 properties. Whenever we first worked it out, his bill was about 70 odd thousand. We just had an acceptance letter from HMRC a couple of weeks ago for, I think it's a total of about £15,000. So, we managed to negotiate, and I won't bore people with the details, put arguments forward to HMRC to say X or YZ period is accessible for different reasons. Eventually it was accepted. So he's had to pay the tax for those years, and now he's in the system.
How easy and difficult is it to argue with HMRC? Because you've always got to put your points forward, and then it's just a whole lot of back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little biased here because I do that for a living. So I come at it from an angle that it's not easy, but it's something that I'm well accustomed to. Whereas a lot of regular advisors and accountants find certain aspects of that more difficult. It's not an easy thing, but I think it has to come from a position of finding common ground and basic negotiation tactics. Really, where do you want to get to, and what's your red lines? What are our red lines? And it doesn't quite work like that, really, but there's an element of that. And then using the tax legislation and the framework of tax administration to find ways to kind of bring everybody to the same table and get to a position where you can say, okay, based on these facts and figures, that's the best outcome, and can we settle on that?
So, do HMRC push back really hard, or are they kind of soft in their approach sometimes when you're going back and forth? Because obviously they know, okay, Salman's an expert, we can't really mess with him. He knows what he's talking about.
I wish that was the case. Look, my credentials help massively, and I'm not unique in that. There's probably a couple of hundred people in the country who have that deep specialism like I do in this particular field of tax. But when it comes, I can only talk from my own perspective. It's about going to HMRC with the credentials that I have and going to them with my approach, which is to say, look, I'm not here to defend anybody blindly. I am here to try and get the right outcome for my client, but I'm also here to make sure that at the end of the day, don't want to sound too high and mighty, that justice is done. So it's when you approach it with that and you can explain that and communicate that to HMRC, it builds bridges. I've burned plenty of bridges with HMRC in some of my cases when the need has arisen because we've been at loggerheads. But it's about building that rapport, building that trust, and then going from there. But your other part of your question was about how easy or hard is it with HMRC, and how do they approach it? Are they soft or are they difficult? Well, it depends on which team you're dealing with, which part of HMRC, and then in the individual offices all have their own way of dealing with things. So some are really hard-nosed, and you have to prove it to the nth degree to them. But then you have to try and break through that facade and try and get to the point of, okay, you might think X, but that's what the law says, or vice versa, what it might be. So yeah, I mean, you get a whole range of officers who are who approach things in a whole manner of different ways.
Okay, so when does a business actually need you? So when should they approach you?
So I think where I'm needed is, it's going to be, and hopefully, and I genuinely mean this, I say this, the viewers hopefully don't need me. But um, if if you think of the following few things, so if you've got, so if you know you need to have paid tax, for example, if you've got properties you haven't paid tax on the rental income, for example, or you sold something and you never paid tax on that disposal, then you need someone like myself to come in and fix that historic issue, pay what's due, but no more, and move on. So disclosures. So if you know you need to make a disclosure, then that's one area. The other side of things is when HMRC is already investigating you, has written to you, has asked you questions, or whatever guise they've come to you and started looking into your affairs. If it's getting to a point where you think your advisor is not able to handle it, or you've been accused of fraud, or you've been accused of some serious behavior that you completely disagree with, or you know you've done something like that, but you want someone with the expertise to manage that, then that's where I come in. I come in and with that level of complexity.
So, you said there was the person who had 40 properties and he just didn't get around to paying tax. How can a business kind of avoid them tax mistakes? Because I would still assume he had an accountant, or he didn't.
He didn't. No, he didn't. So if he had an accountant, that probably would have been far worse because the accountant would have been probably in trouble. Look, generally speaking, the way to avoid tax problems is proactively thinking about these things and fixing them. So if you haven't paid your taxes in the past, it's about getting the right advice and fixing that, because at some point HMRC is going to find out. I personally feel like getting away with it completely is no longer really possible. It's a case of when rather than if they're going to find out, because the digital age that we're in, and HMRC embracing it and using their Connect system and so on, which collects millions of data points on a daily basis and kind of brings it together, and they're able to risk assess all of that. So I really do think it's a case of when rather than if they come after you. So it's a case of if you know that's happened, fix it. And in terms of people who are in business and now are in the system, but they might be getting something wrong, or they're worried about getting something wrong, then make sure you've got good quality accountant to start with. And then where you need it, you bring the right tax advisors in place. You don't really need me for that. What you need is people who will come in and help you structure things in the right way so you're the most tax efficient without taking liberties.
Yeah.
In the recent sort of 6 months or so, there's been huge scandals in our tax world around, especially in the property space, where people have sold schemes or predetermined steps through
tax avoidance schemes.
Yeah, to say to people, if you do X, Y, and Z, you can have the best of both worlds. You can incorporate and have all of these benefits and so on, but it's not been personalized or tailored advice, and it's been kind of off the shelf, and certain liberties have been taken. So it's a case of, look, doing the right things with the right professionals and paying for that kind of advice, doing it properly and making sure that you've got competent professionals assisting you in saving the money, but making sure it's being done legitimately. And there's loads of different ways of doing that, but that's where it comes down to having good quality tax advisors and accountants who look after your tax affairs on a regular basis.
One kind of problem that people see with just the tax system is everyone gets taxed from everywhere, because you pay income tax, dividend tax, corporation tax, VAT. When you die, you pay tax. You pay tax everywhere.
Cradle to the grave.
Exactly. And then when people, so now this is maybe a bit political question, but now you're seeing entrepreneurs just moving from the UK to other places. Most of them are moving to Dubai because of it's just less tax and better quality of life. Why are the government not kind of changing their tax system?
That's a very good question. And anecdotally, that seems to be my experience as well, that you do see more people wanting to move and are moving. Look, you have to sometimes look at that, not sometimes, a lot of times you have to look at that from a real world scenario, how feasible it is for you to move out of the UK. And that depends on each person's circumstances. And the politicians know this, right? It's not that easy to leave the West, let alone a country like the UK, where you still, whatever you think of it, still have things like the NHS and free healthcare and stuff like that. However hard it might be for you to get your GP's appointment, but at least you don't have to pay for it, and you know that it's there, and you know you can go into A&E, and you know you don't have to worry about it paying for it at that point of service. So I suppose they also know this, and from my experience, not everybody successfully moves. People do move, and then they find it difficult, and they might come back, and that can create a whole lot of tax mess in itself. But I suppose why they're not doing a lot about it, it comes down to political will. And again, we're getting into politics here, but at the end of the day, the policies, the government's direction of travel, all of this is dictated by public opinion. If they're not going to get the votes, they're not going to push something. So, keeping wealthy people in the UK is not really generally, this day and age, is going to get people votes, unless from those wealthier communities. So I suppose that's why the will's not there. It's public opinion. And in fact, it's not like they're trying to make this easy. If anything, the rules are changing. So the uber wealthy who come to the UK from other countries is now becoming, with the changes that are coming down the line around domicile and things like that, which I'm not an expert in terms of putting it in place.
That's changing from 90 to 45, right? 90 days or 45 days, I think.
No, you got me there. And the domicile bit is, domicile is where's your home, basically, in a very simplistic way. Where do you plan on dying? It's another way of looking at it. So if you're born in the UK and you live here, all of that, you're domiciled in the UK. Tax residence is a bit different. Tax residence is you could be domiciled in the UK, but you go and live abroad and you're tax resident there. But the reverse of that is people who come in, say, for example, you're billionaires or oligarchs or you're uber wealthy from the Middle East, come here. They're not domiciled in the UK. So what the tax system is allowed to do is allowed them to keep their non-UK wealth and assets out of the UK tax system. So they've been able to be on what's called a remittance basis. So they become tax resident in the UK, but they only pay tax on the income generated in the UK or income brought into the UK. So the stuff outside the UK doesn't get taxed in the UK. For the rest of us, if you live in the UK, you get taxed on your worldwide income. So they're pushing that away now. So the changes that are kind of about to come in is going to try and get rid of all of that, and the whole concept of domicile and all of that's going to kind of try and get ignored and bring everyone's... It's too complicated even for my liking, and you probably need another guest on here to explain that. But generally, that's the direction of travel. So you can imagine, instead of trying to stop this exodus, they're actually going that far. So I think you need a politician on here to explain that to you.
Yeah, let's not get politicians. Get too political. Okay, so if you had a, say, 16-year-old Salman next to you, what would you say to him today?
Ooh. Not sure, to be honest with you. I've not really thought about something like that. So I think the reason being is the way I approach life is that what's meant to happen will happen. I know this is part of our deen and it's part of our belief system, our core belief, our aqidah, but I really do put that front and center. I try to. I think from a young age I have. I think if there was anything I'd say to him would be to, and I don't think I needed it at the time. I was pretty level-headed, but I would just say, look, things just work out. Just go with the flow. Maybe I'd tell myself to work a bit harder at my studies, because I felt like I kind of coasted a lot of times. But yeah, I think not much else, to be honest with you. Qadar Allah, it's meant to happen, it'll happen.
Okay, what legacy do you want to leave behind? Because you also mentioned one of the things about starting your own is to have something of your own, and you also do a lot of charity work, which we haven't gone into, maybe another time. But what legacy do you want to leave behind?
That's a very good question. I suppose I just want to leave behind some sort of sadqa jariyah that continues to benefit me in the next life, I think. So whether it's ADL Tax or whether it's the charity work, or more importantly, whether it's my children, I think that's kind of where I look at. I'm not entirely sure. I don't really think about it in any other way, really. I think if people could think about what I've helped them with, or if I've benefit somebody in a certain way and they can remember me in their du'as, that would be pretty nice. But I think...
And set up a waqf in your name.
Wow, that would be... Yeah, I think so. So I suppose in a way, my work, my sadqa jariyah is my charity work. which alhamdulillah, since starting my own business, I've had the opportunity to get involved in mission relief. So yeah, I suppose that's, I want to try and help create an organization in my free time or my second job, as I like to call it, to leave behind something that, inshallah, hopefully first, benefits people in this life, but also benefits me in the next one, inshallah.
Inshallah. Salman, it's been a pleasure. Could have gone on
Likewise.
for a lot longer.
Yeah.
But inshallah, we'll see you again.
Inshallah.
Thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
No, Jazakallah khair for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise.